Welcome back to the OHSU Effect Inside Health and Science at OHSU. This is where we go in depth with different doctors and researchers up on the Hill. Later in the show, we're going to talk about MRIs and X-rays. But first, let's continue our conversation with Dr. Erin Caughey and Carol Howe. Thanks for sticking around.
Absolutely.
Because Dr. Caughey, I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned last time, that the C-section rates actually declined between in the early 90s. Is that right?
That's correct.
So why do you think that they went down?
Well, I think in the 80s, we went up really quickly. And in the late 80s, we had the highest cesarean delivery rate in the world. And it was frowned upon. It was thought that we were doing a lot of harm to women. And so it was a great effort in this country to offer a trial of labor after cesarean or attempt at VBAC, a vaginal birth after cesarean. And actually, we saw the rate of VBAC in this country go from the very low 1 to 2% rate up to 30-40% in a very short period of time. And at that same time, both the repeat C-section and the primary C-section rates went down in the early 1990s.
So VBAC, you're talking about child 1, C-section, but then maybe child 2 delivered vaginally, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that process? I mean, I guess why you decided to do those trials and everything?
Well, I think people were concerned back then about our rising cesarean section rate, and there had always been a dictum out there, once a cesarean, always a cesarean. And some trials were done that showed that a trial of labor after cesarean could be a safe way to go. And so it was instituted, and it really made a difference. And then, I can't remember the exact date, but the professional organization for obstetricians came out with a policy that said that physicians had to be immediately available when a woman was undergoing a trial of labor. And that combined, I think, with our medical liability environment, just pretty much put a stop to VBAC attempts cold, particularly in smaller hospitals where they were not able to have in-house anesthesiologists and so on. And it's been making a sort of a slow comeback in recent years. And I think it's fairly readily available in the larger metropolitan areas, but in many small areas, rural areas, smaller hospitals, it's not. We have had people come to OHSU, to our practice, our midwifery practice, from as far away as Walla Walla, Washington, from Astoria, from south of Salem, and actually camp in our parking lot in an RV in order to be at OHSU for an attempted vaginal birth. So it's something that's very important to many women.
Yeah, this is well said by Carol. It was unfortunately, I think what happened is that everybody got on the VBAC bandwagon in the early 90s. And to be fair, if you have a very low volume hospital and there's a high volume hospital down the street or in the same town, it may not be the best thing to do it at every single hospital in a regional area. And I'm saying that very specifically because, for example, credit should go out to Ashland Hospital down in Ashland, Oregon. They only do 300 or 400 deliveries a year, but they actually offer VBAC in a hospital because they feel like if they don't, the 2 other hospitals in the area don't offer it, and that then women's only option is going to be a trial of labor after cesarean at home. And if a uterine rupture occurs in a hospital with a surgeon, an obstetrician, gynecologist, or a family medicine doctor who can do an emergent C-section and an anesthesiologist, there is certainly a much greater than 90% chance that that baby will be completely fine, even in the setting of a uterine rupture. If that uterine rupture occurs when someone's at home or in a small hospital where those clinicians are not readily available, then the probability of injury of the baby is quite high. And so I think that being able to offer it in a setting where the anesthesiology folk and the family, in Ashland's case, it's a family medicine group, is willing to be readily available, I think really speaks well of that group because they don't have another option. Here in Portland, there's a lot of hospitals. I know that Legacy, I know that St. V's, and of course OHSU, where we're very supportive of vaginal birth after cesarean. And as Carol mentioned, her group has been particularly successful. In the last year, they've had 40 out of 45 successes. 89% are achieving vaginal birth after cesarean, which I think is a real shout out to her group at OHSU.
Yeah, so can these VBACs be performed at home or with the midwife?
They are being performed at home, and that's not a good thing.
Oh, I see.
No, the midwives do our births at the OHSU midwives do our births at OHSU Hospital.
Well, let's talk a little bit more then, I guess, about your role in an in-hospital birth. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, midwives at OHSU and all around the city, for that matter, we are independent practitioners in Oregon, and we have our own group of patients. We follow our patients prenatally. We do the deliveries, and in our case, for our practice, we do the deliveries at OHSU Hospital. And then we also can provide women's health care across the lifespan to normal, healthy women.
Yeah, I think when people hear the term midwife, they think a lot of at-home births or water births, but it sounds like you kind of do maybe a less intensive birthing process at a hospital as well.
Oh, absolutely. We don't intervene at all unless there's a medical indication to do so. The midwives at OHSU are certified nurse midwives. And most certified nurse midwives do in-hospital deliveries, but there are a small number that do out-of-hospital deliveries. But certified nurse midwives don't do VBACs at home.
Yeah, that's well said. I think, I trained back east, was trained by midwives. I practiced for 11 years in the Bay Area with midwives as partners and as folks that consulted me. I can't imagine practicing in a labor and delivery unit without midwives around. They change the way that our medical students, our residents, and our faculty think about the birth process. They keep us honest to remind us constantly that pregnancy is a normal physiologic process, and that in the vast majority of cases, you just trust that normal physiology will bear out. Now, obviously, there are indicated cesarean deliveries, and in countries where the C-section rate is less than 5%, we know that maternal and neonatal mortality is higher than in countries where it's higher. But when you get to about somewhere between 15 and 20%, when you get above that, you don't see any benefits to moms and babies, but with just more economic costs and more harms, particularly to the mothers.
So, Dr. Caughey, I know you're going to love this next question. Are VBAC births, are they safe? What are the risks? When would you recommend it? Things like that.
So there's, again, we've talked about safe before. Let's be very specific. If a woman comes in labor with a prior cesarean delivery, all comers, her chances of experiencing what's called a uterine rupture, where the uterus pops open, is about 1 in 200, right? Less than 1%. So for most people, a less than 1% risk feels pretty safe. And in fact, we know that risk is even lower if they've had any prior vaginal deliveries, and we knew that risk is even lower if they come in active labor. So there was a recent study that demonstrated if you have a greater than 70% chance of success, again, I remind you the Carroll's group, 89% chance of success, it's safer for moms and babies to have a trial of labor than an elective repeat C-section. So for that group of women, which is the majority of women, it's the safer thing to do.
There are a few indications that you really shouldn't have a VBAC, and one of them would be if you had a classical incision on your uterus, which is an up and down incision on the uterus with the first cesarean section instead of a horizontal one. That would be a contraindication. And clearly, the fewer C-sections you've had, the safer the VBAC attempt.
So you guys are just a wealth of knowledge, but where can people go? I'm sure there's more that you want to talk about, but unfortunately, again, we're running short of time. So is there a good resource out there, or does OHSU, the Women's Health Center, do they have a website that people can look at or call you guys? Tell me about that.
Well, there is an OHSU website for the Center for Women's Health that has links to both the physician practices as well as the midwifery practices at the Center for Women's Health. That would have information. I would point you towards recent publications and reports out of the Evidence-Based Practice Center at OHSU, which just did a large evidence review led by Dr. Jean Marie Gies, who's a member of the Center for Women's Health and the Department of OB/GYN, on VBAC. And that large report was sponsored by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality and has really a wealth of knowledge and information. I would caution you to be careful about your consumption of information on the internet, which can sometimes be strongly biased one way or the other by people that may not be as familiar with the data.
All right, Dr. Erin Caughey, Director of the OHSU Center for Women's Health, and Carol Howe, Director of the Nurse Midwifery Program. Thank you so much for being on the OHSU Effect.
Thank you.
Coming up next on KXL, we're going to talk to a neuroradiologist. I know that sounds daunting, but we're going to cover MRIs and X-rays. Those procedures can be scary sometimes, but Dr. Jeffrey Pollack is going to give us some tips on how to relax and get through it. He'll also tell us about new imaging technologies. That's at 52 past the hour. You're listening to KXL. This is the OHSU Effect, Inside Health and Science at OHSU.